very good afternoon and thank you for joining in. This webinar could well be alongside your lunch break, and I hope you will enjoy digesting the discussion along with your food. We, the humankind, have faced this current pandemic for over a year and a half now. A lot has changed from how we work to how we live. We've started appreciating a lot of things we always took for granted. And essentially, to many, this period has served as a time to rethink, re-strategize, and revive. It has not been any difference for corporates or federal organizations. Every organization had to relook at their modus of operation. Training was no exception. I, for one, used to love going for corporate trainings. If I'm to be brutally honest, my first motivation was always the lavish buffet that's served during the trainings. And of course, learning has always excited me. Today's discussion is going to be focused on how training and coaching has been affected by the pandemic and what the future looks like. To enlighten us all, we have three great panelists with us with a vast amount of experience in this domain. Without further ado, I take pleasure in introducing our panel today. A disclaimer. If I am to do justice to the panelists with their credentials, I will need at least half an hour to do so. That's the experience and qualifications of our panelists. So I'm going to keep it brief for the benefit of time. Firstly, we have Dr. Kerry Haley. Dr. Haley is the founder and CEO of Revelation of Investment Coaching. She is a certified professional coach from the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. Her niche is executive and leadership development. She holds a PhD in general psychology from Capella University and a master's in human relations from the Oklahoma University. She has served the US Army on active duty for 21 years before retiring and continuing with the Department of Defense as a director in military human resources. Dr. Haley, absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me in.
Pleasure. Our second speaker, Michael Sielman. Michael is a Harvard-educated CEO and PCC certified leadership, executive, and life coach. He is a member of Marshall Goldsmith's elite team of executive coaches and has collaborated with 150 plus leaders on 5 continents to bring about their best in performances. He has served 19 years in the government at various departments, including the FBI, TSA, Department of Justice, amongst many others. Michael, absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Last but not least, our third speaker, Dino Correa. Dino heads Layup, an award-winning startup specializing in optimizing corporate training engagement. He has over a decade of experience in the IT industry. Along with his extensive knowledge in brand building, content creation, and customer engagement, he has spearheaded a team enabling training efforts in many leading companies, aiding them to achieve record increases in training hours, reduce costs, and execute their learning and development processes with high returns. Dino, as always, a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Right, we are done the formalities now. So I'm going to kick off with asking Dr. Haley to make her opening statement.
Yes, so Jeffrey, thank you so much again for the invite into this space. And I think this is so timely that we're actually having this discussion because my background, of course, is in organizational development. And as you already stated, that I did that for 21 years in the military, but also over 16 years in the federal government. So understanding how this pandemic has caused us to pivot at a time when, when it was inconvenient, it seemed like for the world, but we actually did it in world speed, right? And so we were able to pivot, but along with that pivot, we had to look at IT as well as the human interaction, the human piece of it. And what does that mean for the organization and the culture in the organization? And then how do we continue to move an organization, not just with the pivot, but also to keep them up to speed in training and keep the culture alive using the IT platforms that we have available to us. And so this is a very passionate part for me. I'm just going into different organizations and seeing how each one of them function differently has been eye-opening. And some of the things, the critical pieces that we miss, or some organizations seem to miss, and then how to continue the coaching experience in that environment, and how to still get the most efficient and effective parts of the employees to show up on a regular basis when they're dealing with everything else, with the pandemic and different, the layoffs and everything else that goes along with that. So this is really a part of my passion. And then bringing in the self-care part of it. What do we do to bring in self-care? Because that's a huge part of maintaining the culture when we look at the training piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haley. Michael?
Well, Jeffrey, thank you very much to Daloon IT for inviting us to participate. I'm really glad to join Dr. Haley and Dino on this panel. We got a chance to talk yesterday, excited to be a part of this. And when I think back to how the pandemic has affected training and development, I think back to when I served at the White House in the Clinton Gore administration. I was in the Reinventing Government office. And I think that a lot of companies and organizations have had to reinvent how they do professional development. And I want to echo some of the things that Dr. Haley had mentioned, is that it's really important that part of that professional development is understanding that our team members, our employees, our leadership in particular, have been working longer hours and are facing burnout. So the self-care that Dr. Haley talked about is part of that reinventing the way we do professional development, helping our workforce reinvent the way they do self-care, putting an emphasis on that, and also making a safe environment so we can have conversations about how people are doing with psychological safety, how they are balancing their challenges at home, and fitting professional development into that. As you mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Leadership Coach Group, and so we help organizations with this kind of transformation, this reinvention, and we have a free ebook on return to work. One of the things we saw in the pandemic, in the early part of the pandemic, there was also at the same time as we hit the pandemic, we had a public health emergency, we were having an economic emergency. And it was the greatest dip in the United States, at least, in economic activity since the Great Depression. So a lot of businesses didn't know where the bottom was, so they cut out training and professional development by and large, including coaching, which is a lot of what we do at the Leadership Coach Group. And so the professional development really suffered. At the same time, employees could have really used some aid in having to lead a team remotely, how to emphasize the self-care that Dr. Haley talked about. So we've had those challenges while the support in general has dropped in organizations. And so now, as we're emerging from the pandemic, or at least in the second half of the pandemic, it's so important to make that investment into professional development. And part of that is online. And people are craving that professional development right now. They've been giving, particularly people in leadership positions, going the extra mile, working longer hours, and facing that burnout. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about when we go forward with our conversation, is what should professional development look like as we emerge from the pandemic, given that people have been giving their extra effort during this time and might need more of that self-care. What should that professional development look like so you can invest in your people and hopefully retain them? Because at the same time, we're seeing this trend of the great resignation, where people are feeling unsatisfied by their work right now, partly because they're not feeling invested in by their organizations with professional development. And so they're saying, hey, I don't need this anymore. There's something better out there for me. And they've been re-examining their life. So part of investing in professional development in your people will be to keep your talent present and have an easier job recruiting new talent. That's what I have to share with my opening remarks. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Michael. I think the great resignation is a topic in itself. We should catch up on it some other day. Dino, stage is yours, sir.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Once again, thanks to Dilunite for having me as part of this panel. I think I echo a lot of Michael's sentiments in that if you look at the pendulum swing that has happened when you compare how the pandemic started off and where it is today. When it started off, we had a lot of celebration about the fact that, okay, we are reassessing our priorities, rediscovering them. To some people, it was more about personal relationships and also about understanding work-life balance. But kind of what happened in that process was that your work day and the time you take off or the point you switch off from your employment and spend with your family and friends kind of blurred. And then it ended up with this scenario where you got people working 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours at a stretch, sometimes with, okay, minor gaps in between, but then your kind of personal life and your professional life are amalgamated and are one and the same. So interestingly, what we've seen is in most of the companies we've worked with, while we did enable them in managing upskilling and also ensuring that professional development continues progressively through a learning solution like what we offer with Layup, we also focus on how can we make this content as condensed as possible. So we are not adding to that burden where in addition to look, I have to complete my tasks, I'm getting overloaded with work and now I have to complete my training. How do I do it properly, or how do I manage it effectively? Those questions were kind of managed. And then now what we have is a pendulum swing in the other direction because of that, in that a lot of people are saying, hey, we want to come back to work, simply because we have that divide or that division between what is personal and what is professional. And then you have this conversation around what kind of workplace are you looking at? Are you looking at a hybrid model? Are you looking at a full-time work model? Are you looking at letting people work wherever in the world they want to kind of model? And the Great Resignation, yeah, I was reading up about it actually yesterday, interestingly, about how people have rediscovered their passions. Like I have met people who are pilots who are now doing like, confectionery and selling it on Uber Eats. There are people who rediscovered art. There are people who rediscovered music. And some of them actually wanted to pursue those passions they probably shelved for a long time. And all of this kind of plays into the overall psyche of somebody who is living an amalgamation between personal and professional in today's modern world and keeping up with the pace they need to keep up with in terms of the rapid proliferation of technology and the increasing stresses that come, especially on senior management when it comes to managing their day-to-day. And now with the pandemic, managing a team that is really hard to manage because you've got high churn scenarios, you've got layoffs, you've got so many other things to consider. So from a platform perspective, I would say we've seen both sides of the coin, and it's been an interesting experience. You start off convincing a customer that you need a learning management solution to effectively measure learning in your organization while working with external trainers, coaches, and also your internal experts. But now it's gone to the other extreme where people are like, we want to learn at our own pace, but we also need a separation between personal and professional. So how do you balance that? So we've seen both of those kind of areas, and it's interesting to kind of understand how people respond in these scenarios and what they prioritize, because they've kind of completely rewritten the rule book in certain ways when it comes to how you look at things and how you perceive social and professional interactions. So what I'd probably bring to the table is sharing how we can kind of help find that balance in terms of utilizing a platform to manage personal with professional and also manage your upskilling and training in a way that is more cost effective and time effective for employees in an organization. So senior management can hit their targets, employees are satisfied through better engagement, and they still feel connected even if they want to stay apart, or they can come together while staying apart. I think that's the best way to open up the discussion.
Right, I think you've set the stage and the expectations clear. So let's dive in. So before that, I would like to remind all our attendees that you can always ask questions right throughout the session, and I will do my best to make sure I cover all the questions. And so first up, we're going to make things, take it one step back and go into the basics. Dr. Haley, the first question is for you. We use the term coaching and training at will, but is there a difference between coaching and training?
There absolutely is a difference between coaching and training. And one of the things that you have to take into consideration is that you train an individual to do something specific, right? You train them to do a task, or you train them to interact in a certain way. Coaching actually taps into that inner person, right? That individual. What we say in coaching is everybody has everything they need internally. Just asking the right questions for them to identify what they need to do to move forward is really the job of partnering with a coachee or the individual that you have as a client. So when you talk about training, you're talking about a specific skill set, whether it be soft or it could be something like IT, something technical. When you're talking about coaching, it really is about empowerment of the individual, identifying what that individual needs to move forward, whatever goals that they've set, whether it's for them to get promoted, whether it's to have more work-life balance, or if they want to be a better supervisor, or if they want to be a better employee. It's really tapping into that inner part of them, that who, about what their values are, and helping them to identify the next steps to improve that part of them so that they show up, the best versions of themselves show up in the scenario that they want to be in. So coaching is definitely different than training. A lot of times you need training first in some areas to help you with some of the skills. If you lack some of the skills that you need in order to become what it is you're looking for in the coaching engagement.
Right, thank you. Michael, next one's from you. Why is training, retraining, continuous training, or knowledge updating important in the first place?
So I think Dr. Haley started us off well on this conversation about why training is important. And I pull from one of the roles I had at the FBI as the Deputy Chief Knowledge Officer. So we were trying to help our workforce be most effective at their job. And one of the things we found that's really important in training is if we can revisit what they've learned and also help our employees with applying what they've learned. Sometimes a training model is where it's one and done, where you go to the training and you come back to the organization and you face challenges and you're like, gosh, where are my instructors from the training to help me as I try to apply this, right? Because it faces the reality, and organization is not exactly what you read in the textbook or what you learned in the training manual. And so it's great if it can be iterative. And so that's something that coaching brings. So you can kind of mix the training model that Dr. Haley talked about with coaching where it's iterative, and that can really lead to behavior change in your employees so they can maximize the most out of the training. So what I would encourage if people do training is can mix it with coaching, or ask the instructors to come back and meet with your team maybe a few weeks after the training when they're going back trying to apply what they've learned to their organization. Maybe they have a common vocabulary and concepts to do specific tasks like Dr. Haley talked about. And then when they're trying to apply that, give them some additional support, remind them of their training, help them to move forward and to maximize the value of what they learned.
Thank you, Michael. Do you know, you've been in the tech space for over a decade now. When did technology really start playing a part in training?
That's a tough ask. Some trace it back to the invention of PowerPoint, but I don't think so. Because actually, when you consider the overall spectrum of learning management systems, I mean, you got to go back to probably the early ages of more modern computing. I think one of the first LMSs, at least from what I have read, is what was called First Class, developed by OpenText back in the day in the 890s for Macintosh. But since then, learning management systems or technology related to learning has evolved, rather, not only transformed into different kind of methods of delivery. You've got the learning destination sites, which are your classic Udemy, Coursera kind of models. You've got your commercial learning management systems that let you basically host a course and deliver it to a group of people. You've got open source systems like Moodle and edX. You've got modern systems which kind of combine other features, kind of like what we do at Layup. And then you've got also these ecosystems that are predominantly used by universities but you've got a central learning platform, and then it's connected to other tools and web solutions. But I think technology has always played a part in training, whether it's to evaluate, to measure, also to disseminate information effectively. I mean, I guess from the advent of e-messaging, technologies played a part, because that is a way of means of giving instruction, if you really think about it. So I think technology has always been a part of it, and it is only going to become a more and more integrated part of it. And that is why learning management systems are supporting people like Dr. Haley and also Michael in what they do. Because if you really think about it, like what I really appreciated about what Dr. Haley mentioned was also the fact that, when you look at coaching as a whole, it is about nurturing your inner abilities. It's not that you don't have it, it's that you have it, but you gotta kind of refine it and help you figure out how to make the best out of it. So sometimes what we can help coaches and trainers do in a scenario like that is, you've got your standard iterative training, as Michael mentioned, which you've got to do and get out of the way. It could be compliance, it could be your basic training that you need to know, the fundamentals, the jargon, the policies, the procedures. So we kind of systemize that so that coaches and trainers can focus on the person and spend more time with them rather than doing repetitive work. And that is, I think, where LMSs really have a big part to play. I don't think a learning management system will ever replace a trainer or a coach, simply because it is a one-to-one interaction. It is a human interaction. Yes, it enables them, it supports them. And that's why we advocate hybrid models when we meet our customers, because you need to either lean on your internal experts or your external experts and consultants in order to get the most out of it. But you do need a learning management system to get the best out of them, in that you can capture that knowledge, measure it, help them evaluate better, and help them develop their programs better, and tailor make it to kind of fix problems in your organization. So technology will continue to play a part in terms of training and also coaching, I would say, in its supportive role.
Technology is taking over everything. Right. So, Dr. Haley, when the pandemic occurred, the first thing that happened was a paralysis on training. And thereafter, organizations did cut down on trainings as an immediate measure. From the outlook, it looked like the right thing to do, naturally, right? But was it the right thing to do?
I would say that when people consider where you can cut costs, they always look for what they consider the easy thing. When you really think about the need for training, what did we need training for? A lot of it was for safety, health issues, interaction with customers. That is crucial part of what a company needs to survive. I was working with a smaller company, and one of the things we worked on was the customer engagement piece and the training employees to deal with customer engagement, because everybody had this heightened sense of urgency and awareness and concern. And what does that show up like? It shows up as a defensive posture when somebody's interacting, and if they don't feel like they're getting the right service and they're concerned about whether or not they're going to get coughed on or spit on, or, these things are real. And so to cut out training to teach people how to deal with those interactions is almost detrimental to cutting off your supply source when it comes to income in an organization. Because what people will do is they will leave and go to another organization, right? Not just the employees, but your customers. So I think it's crucial to keep training alive and make it a priority in an organization, especially in times like this, because this is not natural or normal times that employees are engaging in. And they need those skill sets, especially those soft skill sets, in order to keep their own sanity, but also to deal with the customer and maintain the face of the organization. So I think that for me, my perspective is that this is not a good way to cut costs in the organization, to cut out the training. This is the time when you need it the most. And also, when I talked about self-care earlier, is to teach the employee how to maintain themselves so that they don't get burnt out, like Michael said. They don't get burnt out, but they also are able to survive and thrive in those environments. And the companies that I see really investing money in the training part of it are the ones who are thriving.
I completely agree with you on that, Doctor. Especially, I think when people start working from home, the usual sales pitches that were done face to face, where confident pitches were done, and suddenly you have to be at home and put it on a computer. And sometimes it really, you don't have the skill to do that. And that's when you probably need more training than ever before. So yeah, I mean, I completely agree that training is not the first thing you should keep your hands on, especially when things are changing so much.
Well,
Michael, with that, sorry.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say, and you have different generations who don't know how to use technology the same way. So that was another part of the training engagement that we needed to keep alive and to make sure that the equipment that they were bringing home, that since you don't have a help desk person to come and take care of it all the time, is that you provided that training so that they could continue to work. Thank you.
So Michael, what happened next was, yes, companies did cut down on training at the start, and that was the natural thing to do. But eventually they start realizing that, no, this is not the thing to do. We need to really keep this going. So when did companies realize that they need to, restart trainings and after the pandemic occurred? And how was the transition? And how did employees take it up, especially because everything's virtual?
Yeah, that's a multi-part question. Maybe I have to break that down a little bit. I think just to continue what Dr. Haley was saying about the importance of continuing training and coaching, want to give some examples of different points in the pandemic, which I think is what your question's referring to, Jeffrey. Is there were some clients that we had that said, gosh, we really recognize the importance of continuing training and professional development from the get-go. Some companies were like that, yet it was a human reaction. We didn't know where the bottom was in terms of the economy. So it's understandable. Like travel, that was a no-brainer. We'll cut that out. We're not going to travel during the pandemic at the outbreak. So that was an easy one to cut for the budget. Then training is a natural inclination, even though, as Dr. Haley said, maybe you want to question the inclination because it was such an unprecedented event that people needed help adjusting to it, particularly people in leadership. So at the beginning of the pandemic, some companies recognized that, and especially if there was offerings that weren't at a high cost, they would take advantage of it. So one of the other members of the leadership coach group and myself, we started doing webinars on 7 tips for leading remote teams during a pandemic, because it was different. Like Dr. Haley was saying, you had regular KPIs maybe the organizations had that they were trying to accomplish, and now those things were thrown out the window. It was a totally different economic environment. Their teams were literally afraid for their lives. If you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know what was causing it, how it was being transmitted. We didn't know how many people were going to die. There was all sorts of different models. And then the people who like Dr. Haley said, different age groups for now leading teams that they had seen them in person and knew how to do that, knew how to manage. Now they're asked to being leaders, leading people that were scared and needed help adjusting to this new business environment. So we did a series of webinars and then an ebook about that. How do you adjust to that? So that was the early part of the pandemic, just like that reality from almost literally going one day from people in the office with known ways of doing business and different measurements. I saw a question in the chat about that, measurements for business success that people understood, to all that be changing. Now we're doing remote. Now people are scared. Now you're just not just a manager, you're a leader. And how do we measure success? What should new goals be? So we adjusted to that early on. Then in the middle of the pandemic, people kind of got their feet on them. They started getting a rhythm of how to meet online, but they're like, okay, now we need different kinds of skill sets. Some of the people I was coaching, some people that were vice presidents of marketing, vice presidents of sales, and they're like, gosh, the landscape is so different. And the commercials were different. It was like coming together. We're here for each other. We recognize the pain of our customers. We want to alleviate the new pains that our customers are feeling. And so companies had to pivot and be with their customers where they were. So training and professional development coaching could help companies do that, whether it was having retreats or group discussions, or as I was doing, coaching leaders one-on-one to help them adjust once they had gotten over that initial shock of the pandemic. It's like, okay, now we get a sense. At first, it was like, oh, we're going to shut down for a few weeks. We're going to shut down for a month, and then we're going to be back to normal. So people were like, oh, I can hold on for that long, and then we'll go back to business as normal. Then after a few months, it was like, wait a minute, we're not getting control of this thing. And it's worldwide, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just you can market to different regions or make up sales numbers in different regions of the world. No, this was a worldwide event. And it was a long-term event, as we turned out, more than a year. And so that took some adjustment. And people, companies realized, okay, we have a sense of where the bottom is. We know we need to adjust. We know we need to care for our people. So let's start investing. And let's get some people in here with some expertise that can help us through training, through coaching, through team coaching, hybridize of those different modalities of helping professional development. And that's what we started seeing, Jeffrey, towards the end. Now what we're seeing, one of my colleagues and I who had done the webinars early on, we were just asked by a large telecommunications company to meet with their leadership team and help them plan for the return to work or return to the office. How do we make that successful? The leaving the office it was a pretty dramatic shift, but we can plan more for the return to work. As Dino said, one of those models is a hybrid model. And that's something I would encourage companies to think about seriously. Based on the statistics we've been seeing, a lot of employees don't want to go back to the same work in the office 5 days a week. That's a lot of employees might switch companies if you demand that they do that, especially right away. So I encourage you to look at the hybrid model. So look at that carefully, that return to work, promoting psychological safety so your leadership can have those conversations. That's the kind of training and development, Jeffrey, back to the latter part of your question, that I think that companies are going to want to look for as they're planning for that next phase.
Thank you. That was comprehensive. Dino, in your case, it was a completely different story. In fact, Layup was pandemic ever ready. Did you see increased engagement from employees of your existing clients using the platform during the pandemic, or did you experience companies revoking contracts?
We had a lot of success with the platform. I think technology as a space, especially when it came to communication and learning management systems as a whole, saw a complete vertical almost growth in terms of adoption and also proliferation and expansion. I mean, Zoom's a great example of that. I mean, if you look at the valuation, how it boomed during the pandemic. In terms of the platform we run, we benchmark on engagement. One of the things we've built into the platform is something we looked at from multiple angles, especially we have a lot of social features built into it. So it's kind of like your mini LinkedIn built into the platform, because we also wanted to create a sense of community for staff who are no longer in the same room, joking about, making fun of each other, ordering something as an office treat. And what we noticed was we were actually able to bring teams together regardless of where they were located geographically. And that was a huge win for us. And that was one of our biggest success cases, I would say, or aspects we succeeded at. For example, some of our banking customers went from a 60-40 model where they used to do 60 classroom, 40 online, to a 97-13 model, because they had no option but to shut down classroom training, because it was, you had to have social distance, and as a responsible corporate, you need to make sure that your employees are safe. But they were able to deliver training, especially because, as you know, the financial sector is heavily regulated. So they have to keep up with standards. And when the pandemic hits, there's an economic crisis. And that means banks and financial institutions have to be swift in how they adapt to those situations. So in order to help them upskill their staff, running everything from COVID precautions to how to manage customers, creating customer touch points that are completely virtual, zero contact policies, all of that was delivered through the platform. And one thing we were thankful of is we had expertise both internally and externally, who assisted us in that. That's why I said you can never take out the human element from a technology standpoint in order to deliver that training effectively and help staff upskill more effectively. In the US, we had a big success story in that we won a major pilot with United Health, which is a Fortune 6 company. In that we were able to help primary care practitioners upskill in terms of first contact. I think Dr. Haley mentioned that as well. The interfacing matters a lot during a pandemic. It shares your mood, it shares your intent when it comes to especially patients, because a lot of them are already panicking when it comes to something like a pandemic, because they may not even display symptoms, but in cases it could seem like it's manifesting themselves. So doctors had to learn how to calm them down. And we had to also teach not just doctors, but other healthcare professionals how to do that. So we ran it at 40 primary care practitioner officers. We had 80 participants who took the courses over 600 times within 5 days. And that was a huge success story for us. And when you look at the return in terms of how patients were managed and customers or patient satisfaction rates, they went through the roof as well. So we've expanded to 200 more officers. And I think that's a huge success for us. Being a startup, it's a big win for us. So I think when you look at adoption in terms of cost saving and also creating a sense of community through our social features and engagement metrics, we've been able to achieve a lot of success. And I think that is also primarily due to the fact that what I have noticed, at least when you look at a lot of more archaic customers and corporates in general, is that they had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the future in terms of technology overnight. Whether they liked it or not, this thing's not good. I mean, Michael said it perfectly, right? Everyone thought, it's gonna be a month, it's gonna be 2 months, but no, it was more than a year, and it's still going on. You got like Melbourne going through its 7th lockdown, I believe. So we've got this is I don't want to say this is here to stay because it's too much doom and gloom, but I do think that we're gonna figure it out. But we need the expertise we have, the people we have, the trainers we have, the coaches we have, the technological tools we have in order to overcome this. And while adoption has been really good and we've been able to kind of push companies to grow technologically, I think there's a lot more we can do, and there's a long way to go in terms of making the most out of it.
Jeffrey, if I can build on something Dino said. Yeah, I just want to highlight what you said, Dino, about community. I am not as familiar with your learning management system, but that is a great, important aspect to learning. And at the beginning of our webinar, Jeffrey, you had talked about one of the reasons you went to in-person training was because the food is great. Another reason people often go is because they want to meet people.
Yeah.
They want to find that sense of community. And it's great if as best we can to replicate that on an online environment, because then you have people that are going through a common experience. They have moral support. When they have a sense of community, it can deepen the learning and the application. You can kind of be cheerleading, which is Dr. Haley and I were talking about the other day, is an important part of coaching. But you can also have kind of a peer coach when you have that sense of community. You can say, hey, Dino, great job, with that patient the other day. I saw you calm them down with the software. I saw you implementing step 1, 2, and 3 that the software called for. I'm trying to do that with my patients here during the pandemic. Having some sort of a safe space for students, your employees, to learn and support one another, that's a critical aspect of learning. And it's great when that can be replicated online, like Dino talked about.
Michael, I'm going to build on something that you mentioned before. So this question is for you. So before the pandemic, as we all know, work from home was barely a thing. But during the height of the pandemic, work from home was the only option. But the immediate future, as we just discussed, it's going to be a hybrid model. People are going to work from home, some are going to be in office, and people will want both this to happen. How is this going to affect training, and how do you think organizations should plan for training in an environment like this?
So there certainly going to be some people in the office. Some of the companies we're working with at the Leadership Coach Group, they say they're going to have shifts of people. So they're going to bring down the density. So even when you have some people back in the office, probably your whole team won't be back in the office. So one of the things that's going to be different is training could be hybrid too. Meetings should be hybrid too, where some of the people might be doing the training online, some of the people might be in the office, and you want to be able to hear and see all the people participating, especially if it's live training. Asynchronous, not much an issue, but that's going to be one of the things that's going to be different. And the people that are be doing it remotely, some will be in their homes, but people will be other places. For example, right now, I'm joining this webinar not from my home, but from a vacation rental in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, right? So can still, work's going to look different. People are already working from different locations. So not just work from home, but work from anywhere. I had one of my clients who was a leader in his accounting firm, and he was doing an around the world trip. So basically every time we met, he was in a different country. And so people are feeling like the shackles of are off. They can work from anywhere they want, as long as they have a good internet connection and, you know, a good sound space, they can work, they can collaborate. So training should recognize this as well, that people may be at home, they may be other places, they may be in different time zones. And so having asynchronous learning opportunities is great. And it's time for people to come together with having a sense of community. They can come together live, they can come together in some sort of chat room asynchronously and share when it's convenient for them, when they're awake, might be awake when other people on the team are asleep. So the training of the future needs to take into account these different environments where the professional development needs to occur. And employees are going to be demanding it more. They realize they have choices. There's a real labor shortage starting to happen in the United States now. And so you're going to want to adapt to your employees' preferences if you want to have the best talent. And part of that is being flexible in where and when and how and what topics you deliver for professional development.
I think about adopting, that's what needs to happen in every industry. Dr. Haley, next one's for you.
Can I chime in on that just before we leave that subject, because I'll forget. One of the things, Michael, I agree. One of the things that we do, because I'm a mentor coach and we're training other coaches to become coaches, and using breakout rooms, the dyads and the triads, that's where a lot of the learning and the retention occurs. Because when you have the training, they absorb, it's like drinking from a water hose. But when they're able to go into the smaller dyads or triads, into their smaller groups and have those discussions, that's where the richness, that's where the training and the coaching actually collide, and they actually retain better than just sitting through a regular training and having a raising the hand or the instructor calling on them. So I think that's important to keep that. And as you put that into your future development of training, is to have space within the training to break out. And then also to have space for breaks that you can get up and walk around, because they get tired. That fatigue comes from sitting in front of the camera and not turning it off every once in a while, or not walking around every once in a while. Walking training is good. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but I've taken a training course where we just did it and everybody was walking. We were out in nature and walking, and it was very beneficial. So I just wanted to say that before we left there.
I have a lot of walking meetings, not trainings though. Dr. Haley, next one's for you, right? This is very much aligned with our topic, right? So, you know, once upon a time, we've always had this colleague, you know, the one who walks into our workstation at random times just to chit chat. And it could be a real nuisance because you might be doing something really important. But today we really, really miss that. We really hope somebody's going to come and sit with us and have a chat. The human interaction is completely taken away when you work from home. Mm-hmm. So with that, everything that we're doing is virtual. And our training has now gone virtual too. So, I mean, how are people taking this?
Well, I would say that the individuals who are very social butterflies who enjoy that engagement, they find a way even through the virtual environment. When I'm on Teams, sometimes I hear the you know, and somebody's either calling me or they're saying, hey, do you have a minute or whatever, or the phone, my phone just rung like 5 times in a row. So people find a way to find that space to still have that interaction. And as I stated before, having those smaller breakout rooms is a great way to encourage that interaction. Having like Slack channels or Google Hangout, calling on Google Hangout or calling on FaceTime where people can interact. And it's not just about training. What we encourage is that you have coffee time together and not just, a virtual happy hour. It's like, okay, when we get finished with training, everybody gets their favorite, maybe non-alcoholic beverage for the first hour so that you don't say anything inappropriate. But you provide that space so that you can still enjoy that human interaction. And people find that to be very relaxing, but it also helps them when they're missing being in that training. And as a coach, I coach leaders to do the same thing, to find what works for you, whatever it's in your niche to do. Some of them do it with, like I said, with the coffee. They'll do it at lunchtime. They'll do a virtual luncheon and have those. And that's where they applaud employees for doing whatever they're doing. And that really does work. So you can find that space, create that space as a leader and as a training developer to still have that human interaction. It might not be that touch that you want, but it's that space.
It's a nice thing you're saying, because in an ordinary meeting, you can't necessarily ask people to stand up and dance or do a clap or whatnot. But in a training, you can do that, and we can break the ice and get people energetic. So that's a good perspective. Yes. Dino, next one's for you. So we all know Zoom fatigue is real, right? And your training is, I mean, yours is a platform. Layup is a platform. So everything you do has to be through a mobile phone or a computer. So when there's Zoom fatigue setting in and your training happening on a device, I mean, how do you see this working, and what has been the response, especially with a pandemic world?
Okay, so we have a couple of approaches we use for this. I mean, I really like some of the ideas that Dr. Haley shared also in terms of movement-based training and also breakout rooms. I mean, a great way we emulate that is through discussion portals and mentor-mentee discussion rooms on our platform. Because sometimes it is important to have that. It is important to have those spaces in which you can have a one-on-one kind of experience in terms of in a smaller group. And also to add to what Michael mentioned earlier about the importance of understanding that your talent now has options. They can leave you and look at other opportunities that give them more personal fulfillment. I think it's imperative that you engage them and involve them as much as possible. And also another thing you have to try and do is obviously in the pre-pandemic era, you had the opportunity to do training sessions one-on-one, get them to stand, get them to clap, get them to jump around, do different things and try out different things. And even do collaborative activities as an example, which we've all been to as part of these team building programs. But you can't do that online anymore. So if there is a way to kind of emulate that experience in terms of getting them to either collaborate on a virtual activity, for example, there are platforms that do that really well. I know certain larger corporates and groups we work with that have Kahoot competitions, as an example, where they kind of break out of their classic meeting model and go into this competition style where it's kind of like an immersive interactive activity. You've got a game master and people are involved in that. And these are sometimes senior executives. These are not like your average executives. And the fact that they have a communal activity completely breaks the ice and gets more out of the meeting. Another thing we do a lot on the platform is a concept we follow very, 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 how can I put it, religiously, is micro-learning. I think when you really look at the fundamentals of a lot of training programs that are not one-on-one based, especially if it's regulator-oriented training or process training, you can break it down into bite-sized chunks, which people can learn on demand. They don't really need to sit through a 40-minute PowerPoint, which explains something that they could learn at their own pace, at their own time. Especially in businesses such as logistics, where you're on the move all the time, you've got to pull people out of their work environment to upskill themselves with regard to a process. Whereas with personal development and professional development and one-on-one coaching, that is necessary, that is important. But when it comes to your classic regulator or process-oriented training, you can do that through a bite-size on-demand model. And in that way, what you can do is you can get your process optimizers, T&D team to focus on making that content the best version of what it can be, rather than being stuck or getting mired in the whole repetitive, session process. So that is one thing we do. We also have gamification. I know that's a kind of a buzzword in the LMS space, and a lot of people talk a lot about it, but we've actually seen results with that. Like, for example, if you have somebody do an activity, get a point, unlock a certificate or a badge, and get a virtual reward on our platform, because of its social features that kind of are similar to Facebook or LinkedIn, you can celebrate that. People can appreciate that. And that creates a sense of value in that employee, even though they might not be in the same space as their coworkers. And one thing we even did was we took it a step further. We actually spoke to a CEO to come online and talk to the team and say, congratulations on the certificate. And to somebody who's at the bottom of the food chain, when you got somebody at the top who just takes a call, the satisfaction rates just go through the roof. And there were people who are like in retail, who are guys who stock shelves, who got emotional because they never expected a video call from the CEO of the group. So I think that personal connection is so important in creating value for somebody in the organization. So we use gamification and we use those personal touch points for that. And as I mentioned before, social features where you can react, comment, share, we did with competitions like post a picture from home or post a picture with your family, do a collaborative picture with a team and have like a team session, as Dr. Haley mentioned, where you could have like an after hours meetup and do like a shared, like watch a movie together or something like that online, because there are platforms that let you do that, like a watch party on Facebook. You could basically share that experience, and that creates a sense of community, because people are craving interaction when they're siloed in their homes. Fundamentally, we're all social beings, and we really need that interaction for our mental well-being and also for our social well-being. So I think it reflects in our professional and personal lives when that is the case. So I think some of those features, our social features, our gamification, our bite-sized learning delivery, are some of the ways we help tackle this issue, and also create a sense of community and engagement amongst an organization's employees.
Dino, you put a lot of thought into Layup. Well done. Right, we don't have a lot of time, so we have 10 more minutes. We have one question that's been asked on Zoom, and Dr. Haley had basically answered it. And I have a couple on my WhatsApp that I got directly, so I'm going to ask some of them last. Before that, I have two questions which I want to fire to the panel. First, I'll come to Michael. I want to take this with Dr. Haley. Doctor, when people leave organizations, the natural thing is knowledge and experience departs. How do you think companies should ideally plan for, minimizing this impact, and especially with coaches like you? How do you look at this?
So I think that it is critical, number one, to have succession planning in place in any organization. Is critical to have succession planning in place. I also think that instead of looking at it from talent management or knowledge management, leaving the organization, how do we keep people from leaving the organization? Is to create that backwards step. As what do I have in place? Like I believe Michael said and Dino said, when you invest in your employees, they are more likely to stay within the organization, right? If the onboarding is great, they're more likely, and that comes from the training that you provide, the coaching that is provided. I know organizations that I work with, if coaching is available to anybody who wants it, those organizations thrive. It's the organization that says we're only going to give it to the top tier people, where people feel like that they don't matter in the organization, that they're not value added in the organization. But when it's open to anyone, that's where you see people saying, I want to stay here because they're vested in me and I'm loyal to the company. I think that it's also critical when we talk about the training and coming back, and not just having the one person go to the training, but how do you bring that back into the organization? And how do you share the knowledge that you have? It should never be that we have somebody that's siloed, that they all have the all information and they're not sharing it across the platform, and they're not sharing it across the organization. And so to me, it's about having critical programs in place. You want to have mentoring, you want to have coaching in place, you want to have training in place, because if I'm mentoring someone else, they have a lot of the same knowledge that I have. They understand how the organization moves. And if I create a training or I create a coaching environment where I'm not just coaching, I'm not receiving coaching as the leader, but I'm creating a coaching environment by coaching the other individuals on the team, then that knowledge is transferred as well. So having something, a systematic program in place where it's not just succession planning, it's not just coaching, it's not just mentoring, but it is collaborative, so that that knowledge is being transferred and it does not leave when one person leaves.
Thank you. Dino, quickly, knowledge retention and tech platforms go hand in hand. So how does Layup answer this question? I mean, how does Layup ensure knowledge retention is possible in the platform?
So Dr. Haley was spot on in the fact that you should not ever, put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, in the fact that if somebody who's been in the organization a long time does not feel valued, when they leave, they're taking with them some of the best processes they probably understand, or a way in which they do things. They're taking with them a whole bunch of knowledge in terms of the product itself or the service that you offer as an organization. At least two ways we try to tackle this problem is because there's a lot of tacit knowledge like that gets captured in discussion. So we've created kind of help groups between certain roles. So for example, if it's a bank, all the managers are in one group. So if one bank manager says, hey, I have a problem here, could somebody help me? You got another bank manager who responds. And the T&D team has visibility on this. So they can look at that problem and see, can we fix that process through our process team? Can we improve our training programs in order to address that problem and capture that more efficient method in solving that problem? And also see whether we can also reward this person who's been in the organization for suggesting this. And that offshoots into another feature we have called Idea Box, which is basically an innovation module. An interesting statistic we saw with that was in most South Asian markets, we have this problem where people are not prone to share ideas. When you have a virtual interface, we noticed ideas jumped by almost 200 to 300%. And some of those ideas actually saved the bank that we were working with at the moment millions and millions in revenue, because it was just a simple tweak when it came to their digital banking. The same in terms of retail. A factory flow employee would know how to optimize a nozzle when it's filling a bottle, as opposed to some engineer who's designed the entire system. And one such employee actually walked away with a massive reward, but in turn saved the company potentially billions in revenue over a period of time. So it's not where you are in the hierarchy of the organization. Everybody has something to offer, especially if they are street smart or they've been in the organization for a long time. So in addition to succession planning, also recognizing employees who've been in the organization for a long time and ensuring they remain there will help an organization kind of get more in terms of optimizing its internal processes and getting real on the ground feedback in order to improve its offering as a whole to its customers. So I think those are some of the features we've built in our solution to kind of pull information. But I mean, Dr. Haley was spot on in saying that that is absolutely imperative in order to plan the road ahead, especially during these pandemic times.
Thank you. Michael, there's a question asked by a fellow CEO, directed at you, Michael. So what she's asking is, during the pandemic, everything possible was relooked at and renegotiated. No stone was unturned. Did the pandemic force coaches to relook at their commercials? And if so, how has it changed?
Did a pandemic force coaches to look at their commercials? Is that what
yes. Like, your rates and charges and stuff like that. So it's a typical CEO question.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is usually some people in the coaching industry thought they needed to meet with their coach in person. And that is often at a higher price point because the coach has to also address the travel time to go meet with that client in person. And so those folks that had been meeting in person probably are now meeting online. So that is able to be offered at a lower price point. Another thing that we've seen a movement for is like a theme we've heard in some of our discussion today is having a sense of community. And so sometimes CEOs have felt they can foster community and get bigger bang for their buck by having team coaching, where they have a whole team being coached at once or kind of mixing coaching and training together. And that can be offered at a lower price point too, when you have a bunch of people receiving the service at once. That's one of the services we offer at the Leadership Coach Group, is we also sometimes do a psychological safety assessment to see how the team's functioning and
Double
then
up.
trying to help them perform better.
Sorry, Michael. Sorry to stop you. I'm going to double up the question to you because you mentioned about increasing the team size and was one way of really looking at companies. The question asked on the Q&A, the size of the team becomes a problem in a virtual coaching environment. The larger the team, the harder it gets for employees to get engaged, stay engaged. What is the best solution for this and how do we manage large groups? So you're talking about large groups. I mean, I just thought I'll add that up as well.
So Dr. Haley had a part of my answer earlier is breakout rooms, right? Breakout rooms are something that we can do. When we were talking with this telecommunications company, we had the entire leadership team, the president, senior vice presidents, all their directors on at the same time. And we sent them to breakout rooms so they could have that deeper discussion, be vulnerable in smaller groups. And then sometimes we also interacted with the group as a whole using tools such as Mentimeter, which is available free if you are looking for ways to have a large group have more interaction, where a word cloud develops as you're asking for input, and you can see it live in a webinar or in a training. That's a great tool to help with the large group interactions. My partner and I, we once did it where there was like 700-800 people on at once, and creates an awesome word cloud when you have that many people on. And then it really deepens the learning. You see trends of what's going on.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. Dino, the last questions for you because of time. I've watched you speak in a couple of forums and you keep saying that Layup, the cost of Layup per month is cheaper than one of your average Starbucks coffee. I mean, is that even really true?
It is. It absolutely is. So basically, I'm not going to just share rates on this forum arbitrarily, but technically, because we are a cloud product, right? So you're on a SaaS model, which means it's a per user per month cost. And it definitely costs less than your average Starbucks coffee for a month. So it's 12 coffees a year, less than 12 coffees a year. But yeah, we do offer competitive rates simply because I don't believe that very expensive platforms really do the job necessarily. I think it's kind of tailoring it to your organization and also leveraging on expertise in-house and your consultants, people like Dr. Haley, people like Michael, who are able to really get the best out of employees. So we work with external experts like them in order to understand how can we do this better. We also work with internal training resources to understand what are your processes, how can we optimize those, and how can we deliver it more effectively. So we are an enabler, fundamentally. We connect the dots, and that is what technology does best. So I think as a platform, I would say we aren't charging exorbitant rates simply because of that, but I don't want to shoot myself in the foot doing that. But but fundamentally, we have to make it cost effective in order to scale, especially during these times. We've given massive reductions to our customers because the hospitality industry is affected, the tourism industry is affected, the travel industry is affected. And we also need to do our part in supporting them and uplifting them through very tough times. So yeah, I stand by that. We're cheaper than a Starbucks coffee.
You were not joking. That's good. Right. I think because of time, we have to come to an end of the session. I really hope all of you learned as much as I did. Thank you very much for all our panelists, Dr. Haley, Michael, and Dino. You guys were great. And I must thank Darshana from the Delhi IT team for all the technology support. I'd like to leave all of you with one of my favorite quotes in coaching. It was said by Christine Kane. To build a strong team, you must see someone else's strength as a complement to your weakness, not a threat to your position of authority. With that, I would call it a day. But I would also like to ask if Dr. Haley or Michael want to add something before we close up. Oh, I can see Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
I just want to say I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for inviting us. And this doesn't have to be the end of our conversation. I'm happy to, I mentioned a lot of resources quickly. If someone wanted to learn more about anything I mentioned, you can just reach out to me on LinkedIn or through leadershipcoachgroup.com. I'll be happy to answer any question and help with resources I mentioned or other challenges you might be facing. Thank you for the invitation again. And thank you to my panelists as well. I've enjoyed collaborating with you.
Pleasure, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing. This has been really great. Dino, I learned a lot from you, especially since you're not in my particular field. So I always look for opportunities to hear from someone else's perspective. Jeffrey, thank you so much for hosting this and then the invite. And Michael, I'm sure we will collaborate again some more. If you want to know any more about what a revelation of investment coaching brings to the table, you can visit us at ROI-coaching.com. And we can talk more about assessments, but also about just bringing your organization to the next level and getting the best version of yourself or your organization out there. So thank you.
Yeah, just to wrap up, thank you, Jeffrey, for having me. And it's been an absolute pleasure being on a panel with Michael and Dr. Haley. I've learned so much. And Dr. Haley, you're a veteran. It's always an honor. It's always a pleasure to share a panel. I just wanted to wrap up by saying that, yes, you can reach out to me as well on LinkedIn in case your organization needs assistance and you're looking for an LMS in trying to automate your training expertise. We've got a lot of tailor-made solutions and we can give you something that's got the best bang for the buck. So let us know what works for you and what you're looking for. And I'm sure we can come up with something because we are a startup. We are hungry to learn and work with you and collaborate with you, as all startups are. But thank you for the opportunity, Jeffrey, and thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So for the benefit of the audience, we'll be sharing all the LinkedIn links of all the speakers, plus also their company websites for ease of access. Thank you very much from all of us at Dell Unity. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.